Started. So just going ahead and getting the recording started to have that available to you all as well. But thank you again for attending today's session on CMMC compliance and the fact that, as we know, this initiative is coming here rather quickly now. A lot of progress has been made over the last, I would say, 6 months. And unless there are any kind of major hiccups, this particular initiative is going to go into effect. And it will affect any of you that are servicing the Department of Defense today, and those that you who may be on or considering participating in contracts in the future. And while it is a bit daunting, I think there are some things that can be done if you follow good discipline that can make complying with these requirements not as difficult as they may seem. And we'll talk to you a little bit about how SureShield and others can help you with that. And questions you should be asking your providers or your MSPs if they are not as familiar with the program. So we'll talk briefly about some of the current requirements, the submission that was made and where that submission is at in terms of the final rule and where, what's coming, the impact of that submission on you as a provider, and then some of the things you should be doing in order to make sure that you are prepared for this. If you do anticipate participating in contracts, and what the downfalls can be if you don't have good disciplined processes in place for this. And then briefly, we'll talk about how our company and partners that we also work with can leverage technology, how you can leverage some technologies to help automate some of this compliance process. Keeping in mind it's a continuous thing. It's never, if you're going to be participating in this, it's never going to go away, meaning it's not a one and done type thing. You'll need to have tools that allow you to continuously keep yourself updated on where you're at in meeting these particular requirements. We'll give a very brief product demo, and then we'll take on questions to those who are participating here today. And then just a note, we will take one or two brief polls during the course of the presentation, one about midstream and then one towards the end of the presentation. So as those of you, I don't think it's, if you know anything about the process at this time, you know that the CMMC program or process is going to affect every single provider that supplies to the Department of Defense. And today, there's over an estimated 300,000 providers. As you know, currently, all of you are supposed to be meeting the NIST 800-171 requirements, which includes submitting a system security plan, a plan of action and milestone report, and a score that you submit to the supplier performance risk systems. Hopefully, many of you have already done that, but it's very critical even if you have and how recently you've done that you go back in and make sure that you're updating that and seeing where you stand, because even some of the requirements that exist today will change in the future. As an example, if you are deemed to be at a level 1, and if you all are familiar, there will be 3 different levels of compliance depending upon the services that you're providing and the contracts that are being awarded by the DoD. A level 1 requirement is basically what they call 17 basic cyber hygiene controls. And those are for companies that are not deemed to be handling what they call CUI data, controlled unclassified information, more sensitive data that obviously enemies of ours want to get their hands on and have in the past. And of course, is a reason why this program is coming into place, because there was a need to put a little bit more enforcement and a little bit more oversight to assure that suppliers were doing the proper things to protect that data. There will still be some of you that will be allowed over the course of this particular program to attest that you're meeting the requirements based upon the levels that you're at. And just to complete that thought, there will be a level 1, which is 17 controls. The level 2 is basically mimics the NIST 800-171 control requirements, which you should all be somewhat familiar with. Where this gets a little easier is in the past processes. If you were only required to meet a level 1, you still had to answer all the 110 questions. In this case, deeming how your company will be deemed to be needing to participate in this, you'll have a little bit more flexibility around how you report that data. But a level 1 participant will be doing self-attestments. They'll have to do that every year, and they will also be doing that, having that to be signed off by kind of the highest authority within your organization. And with that becomes, high responsibility to make sure that what you are submitting and what you're attesting to is truthful and accurate. If not, that could be, consequential. At the level 2, now these organizations are deemed to have controlled unclassified information. And right now they're indicating that there will be some that will still be able to self-attest at that level, and some, as you know, that are going to have to go through a full third-party oversight review, and basically with the seal and sign-off that you are meeting these requirements. Those will take place once it's in place. You'll have to go through this once, I believe, every 3 years. However, you'll need to self-attest in between those timeframes that you're currently meeting those requirements. And again, having continuous tools in place are important because, as we know, nothing is static in this world. If you have changes to your own environment, if you've added new systems into your environment, if you've added new people, you need to revalidate that you're still meeting the requirements and the compliance requirements. So and then there's a level 3, which is at the highest level. There's probably going to be a very few number of companies that will have to meet that requirement, and they'll actually go through a government assessment of that as well. But given the things that have happened in the past and the increased, hostility towards nations trying to steal data from us, it is very safe to say that this is going to continue to move forward. And there's been a lot of things that have been done over the course of the last 9 months that continue to indicate that. As we know, back in July, the DoD sent its CMMC framework to OMB's Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. That went through a review process. It was released for public comments back in December. And just to know where that is now, those public comments have been closed at this point, and they are currently being reviewed again and having an OIRA review happening now, which means that the final rule is coming. It could come in the next month or two. It's, if you look at timelines, there's most likely that we're going to see something that's going to happen here towards the beginning of the last quarter of this year. And that means that if you don't have things in place now and this rule goes into a place and they start implementing this next year, you're going to be behind the 8 ball if you don't have those things in place today. So as things stand today, the next step is in that review process, and then the expectation of a final rule being released and approved prior to the end of this year, and then it will be in effect. Keeping in mind that today, you still have those requirements if you are a provider to be submitting your NIST 800-171 scores, your system security plans, and your plan of action and milestone reports to the SPRS. So what is the impact of that submission? It's, as we've said, they're serious about implementing this. There's no question with the activities that have taken place that this will come, and it does look like it's coming now relatively soon. Of course, there could be changes, but most likely there's no indication that there's going to be any drastic changes to this. If you have not started the process of a real internal evaluation, your organization is seriously behind. When I say that, have you completed a NIST assessment? If you have you updated that? Have you gone back and reviewed that particular NIST 800-171 score, where you stand? And also, a best practice, while it's not that easy to do, is they will have certain controls that you are not going to be allowed to put on a plan of action and milestone. A plan of action and milestone, as you know, basically is you being able to say, okay, this control isn't implemented, but we're working on implementing it, and we intend to have it in place by X date. Well, at a level 1, you won't even be able to do that. You just have to have it in place. So at a bare minimum, you should be evaluating your company to make sure that you have those basic 17 cyber controls in place. Most likely, those that have weightings of 3 to 5, a higher weightings on those controls, will be ones that they will expect you to have in place. And there's data, as you know, on each control in terms of how that weighting works. And then, of course, waiting on the rule to come in place is just going to put your organization behind the 8 ball. There's a potential for loss of contracts, a delay in certification. There's already indication that there are not as many what they call C3PAOs, those that can do certification, that are available right now, that have been to take on the numbers of those of you that will have to go through this process. So the sooner you have the tools in place to make you feel comfortable with that, the better position you're going to be in to secure the contracts you have today, as well as to assure that you can participate in the contracts going forward. So with that, I want to take just a minute to submit or ask a little poll in terms of, with the audience we have here, where you're at today. Have you done this? Have you submitted a current NIST 800-171 plan? And even if you have, how current is that? Have you updated this? Because it's very important that you go back, particularly now, and take a look at where you sit with this and where you may be in the future. And I'm just going to give folks a little bit more time to respond to the poll. We don't always have everybody respond, but I can see that a large percentage of the folks who are answering right now are indicating they have not even done an initial assessment and submitted that. Again, if you are a participant in the program and actually have contracts today, you should be doing this and making sure you have that in. If you're evaluating getting into the program, it's best that you start doing that right now. And I do see, as well as those that have submitted, there's only a small percentage that have gone back and reassessed. And that can be difficult to do if you don't have good tools in place. So with that, we'll continue on, and I'm actually going to talk to you a little bit about how organizations, things that you should be doing, and then we'll talk a little bit and show you how SureShield or MSPs that you may be working with can help you in that process. So what should your organization be doing? Obviously, you need to do an audit or an assessment against the CMMC and the NIST 800-171 frameworks. Keeping in mind, at the 800-171 level, those are the exact same controls as CMMC. So while the terminology in answering may be slightly different, they're basically the same items that need to be done. Now, if you are at a level 2, one of the control requirements is that you're doing a regular scan of your environment, of your network environment, of your computers that may not be connected to the network, but are still ones that people are working on. And then your external, anything that you have externally facing to the internet, those need to be scanned. They need to be assessed for vulnerabilities that could put your company at risk for attack. And then they should have a plan for doing regular remediations. And doing this is not, again, a one-time thing. There are new vulnerabilities that are introduced almost daily. And so having tools that can help you monitor that and then identify those that are highest at risk to you, and then having a way to actually fix those will be important as an ongoing process. And then, of course, you have the responsibility today of submitting that POEM if you don't have certain tools in place, your system security plan, and a NIST score. Again, without good tools in place, these can be somewhat cumbersome to put together. And most importantly, in answering or working with folks and answering questions, it's critical that you have the supporting evidence and the appropriate policies to back that up. Just indicating that you're compliant will not be enough, because if you do not have the evidence to prove your compliance, if you don't have the proper policies in place that outline the processes that you will do to maintain that compliance, that will be a strike against you. And actually, then again, if you were to attest that you've met something, you would be in trouble if you didn't have that backup. So obviously you want to have defined policies and procedures related to CMMC in place. You want to have methodologies to identify where your critical data lies and making sure you have good processes in place to do that. As I mentioned, we're going to talk to you about tools that you can use individually to help you with this, but there are, as you know, there are in the in the CMMC ecosystem, these registered provider organizations that are really certified to help you identify those gaps and help improve those proper processes. We work with quite a few of those ourselves, who use our platform as a means to actually help automate some of the assessment process, but they can help you in terms of consulting services and that you may need if you need additional help to get these things in place. And you should start preparing and scheduling, if you haven't already, at least thinking about who you're going to go to if you are deemed at a level 2 to do your third-party assessment, and start getting ideas of what those costings may be like. Now, the more that you have in place, the better shape you're going to be in terms of reducing the time and the effort that those groups will have to validate your compliance. So with that, how can SureShield help you with this? And how do we help organizations that we're working with meet these compliance requirements? I'm going to show you a tool called ComplyShield that really has a lot of pieces in place that can help semi-automate a lot of this process, can provide you with very specific guidelines and information to help you make sure that you meet the requirements, and also allow you to house all the information you need to back up that evidence. We call it, and it is what we call a continuous compliance solution. So there are things you can do to reassess at given points in time. As we mentioned, if you've added new people, you've added new computers and the likes, you may need to be going back and making sure that controls that maybe you deemed in compliance at one time are not impacted. And we'll show you actually how our solutions can help with that as well, to keep you on top and really make that continuous compliance more easy. You'd want to know where you have issues that you want to address if they need to be addressed, and not necessarily be concerned about everything if you know that there's certain things in place that aren't impacted. Our solution allows you to basically conduct an assessment for both NIST 800-171 and CMMC without having to do any additional work. We do have tools that also can provide those vulnerability scanning processes for you. For those of you that may be working with an outside IT service, you should be asking them if they are doing these services for you if you're not certain. And they should be doing those because those are requirements of this particular program. And actually, that's just good cyber hygiene practices, that you have methodologies to make sure that your environments are being continuously looked at. Now, we've added another layer to this to actually do what we call some automated compliance scans, where we can look at certain assets within your environment and infer whether you are meeting a compliance requirement, as well as to gather and provide that evidence that you would need to back up your answer to a question. And then the tools themselves can help identify CUI data and help you understand where that resides and how to put that under better protection. And lastly, automate all the types of reporting that you may need to have to do, from the plan of action and milestone report, your SSP. And our programs come with packaged policies that allow you, if you don't have those in place, to edit and update those and link those to the controls that you have as well. I'm going to take just a brief moment to give you an idea of how this particular program, or our Compliance Shield program, works. So, as I mentioned, we can activate a variety of different compliance security frameworks for the clients that we work with, and we have a lot of folks that are working with us today who use this to maintain and house and review where they stand on meeting these compliance requirements. For purposes of today, we're focusing obviously on CMMC, but this platform has over 31 different compliance frameworks. So if you're an organization that's going to need to meet CMMC, but you also have HIPAA issues, or you have SOC issues, or you have ISO issues, or you have CIS, all of those exist in our program, and we have gone through the effort to ease that burden by doing crosswalks. So if you have particular controls that really share the same characteristics, we crosswalk that data so that you're not having to input or gather that across the way. When you come into our tool, and this is an example of someone that has already started a process, we're going to give you a lot of guidelines and what I would call kind of a work frame as to what might need to be done, or where you stand currently and what type of things may need to be addressed. You can see up here, there are 100, as we know with CMMC, 110 controls. There's still 75 practices that need to be addressed. There's some that we already know are non-compliant. Some may not have been answered. And just as an indication of an impacted, this has to do with how you can design your system to say, I want to have a continuous re-review of certain things. So impacted may mean that something new has been added into the environment. That control now, what at one time may have been answered as compliant, and there could be an impact on that control that requires us to take a look at it. And it's simple as just going in and coming back to those and taking a look and finding out what that particular control is. As I mentioned, we also provide policies and procedures. Now, you can bring your own in here, or you can leverage and edit the ones that we have to meet your organization's requirement. But there is also a validation that those have been reviewed. You need to at least indicate and know that they're going to look and say, have you really reviewed this policy? Have you made sure that your folks have done that? So we provide what I call a guide rail that, again, will ask you to make sure that you've done that proper review. It's as simple as just going into those policies, taking a look at what those policies are, and making sure that they've been properly updated if need be. So you can see, for instance, here, under the access control policies, we know that there are 22 practices, as they call with CMMC, that are linked to that particular policy. And in this case, I have 11 of those that are deemed compliant and 11 of those right now that are not compliant. And it's another way for me to go and review where I stand from a policy perspective. But in our program, as I mentioned, we provide a policy templates. You can bring your zone in. And the nice thing is those will all be linked to the policies as well. You can see here, I'm just showing an example of one of those policies. If there were things that needed to be updated on this policy, you can actually set that up as a plan of action or a responsibility to go in and take a look and do that. But you can see here within, we can edit our own policies, or we can go ahead and update and bring in one of our own, one if we already have those in place. So a lot of the, again, what I would call automation or taking a lot of the big time manual processes out of these are here right now. Again, all the evidence worksheets, these are things that can be pulled into a particular control to make sure that you have the supporting evidence. And at times you may need to review that evidence to make sure that it is accurate for what you need to do. I'm going to just briefly touch on an example of how our teams go in and use this to answer controls. So you'll see if I'm looking at a particular control, again, I can segment these into areas. I can distribute this work to other people to help me with and distribute that workflow. But you can see here, we provide a tremendous amount of guide rails and guidance on what needs to be done in order to meet these particular requirements. So to help guide you or help guide your MSPs in the process to help you understand what may need to be done. In the case of this, you can see where we've only started this at a baseline. If I had answered this question and had updates to it, this particular guide compliance status and evidence and responses would have kind of a table that would start to be built with it that would show all the different things that have been done over time with these. We show the crosswalks, we show the implementation recommendations, what you need to do to actually implement this correctly, supplemental guidance, the evidence that you may need to do to prove compliance. And then we also provide survey questions if you're not using what we call our compliance scanner. But these survey questions basically, again, are some guide rails to make sure that as you are looking at your response to this particular question, do you have the particular appropriate requirements in place? If you don't, you can actually click on these and indicate that you want them to now go into a plan of action to be addressed. If you do, then you'll answer them yes, and then you will be able to answer that particular question as compliant as well. So when I talk about guidelines, we are careful to not let you just answer a question compliance if there's not some of the supporting information or backup to do that. And this is extremely helpful because, again, it's going to assure that when you are attesting to meeting something, that you know you have all that in place. Lastly, you have ways in which you can upload evidence as well. And then you can have people who can sign off on these as a paper trail to show that you've also met these requirements as well. Lastly, I'm going to just touch on, once you have done this, there is a tremendous amount of obviously reporting that can be done out of this, and that all gets automated. We have standard what we call compliance reports, so you can go in and look at how you are participating and how you are doing right now at that point in time, what needs to be addressed, what kind of remediation practices need to be in place, ways to help you assign and think about work that needs to be done to get your company or working with your provider to make sure that you have the right things in place. And then we also have obviously automated all of the current, what they call DFARS reporting requirements. So those include things like the NIST assessment score. As you know, with each control, they have a weighting in terms of, from a scoring perspective, It's an interesting algorithm because there are certain controls that have higher negative weighting, but having them in place only gives you a score of 1. So when there's 110 controls, the highest score you could get would be 110. However, if you had nothing in place, I believe the negative impact on that could be down to like a negative 186. And that's because, for instance, a highly weighted control with a 5, if you don't have that in place, you're going to be negatively impacted. Once you do get that in place, it will give it a score of 1. And at any point in time, again, being a continuous tool, I can go in and see where I stand on that score. And as I update items to help me understand what I need to get in place, these compliance scores will be improved or will be changed on the fly as you are doing the work to get them in place. And we would not want to go in with a negative 163 score on this, that's for sure. Lastly, you have as I mentioned, you have the assessment scores. We help automate all of the plan of action and milestone process. So again, if you have put things that can be on the plan of action and milestone report, our system will automatically pull all of that data with the information on what items you're going to address, when you're going to address them, the timing of them, and then the completion of those as well. Again, all automated within the system. No need to go out and do this separately somewhere else. And then lastly, we have the system security plan. Again, all built into here that will allow you to automate that whole process as well. And as we mentioned, as part of this, you're required to submit this, and most likely will continue to be required to submit a system security plan as part of the CMMC process. Again, if I were to pull this, you'll see the data that's automatically generated will pull in information, for instance, on your network architecture that's required, your system boundary diagrams, your interconnections. This is all automated and pulled in from our scans that can be run, contacts within the organization, and then the practice compliance status as to where you stand on all of these particular practices. And this is exactly what is required to be submitted as an SSP. We've taken the liberty for you to automate that whole entire process. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on others outside of just mentioning that we also have tools like our systems, our vulnerability and scanning utilities. Again, these are systems that you can use yourself if you're using an outside provider. The most important thing to understand is that you need something that can do active real-time vulnerability scans of your environment, and then to help prioritize and expose to you what may be the most critical, and most importantly, not only the criticality of the risk of that vulnerability or those vulnerabilities, where they reside, and most importantly, how do I fix them? And our system will go in and give you all of that guidance on how you remediate those particular vulnerabilities. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. And I apologize, coming through here. Just to summarize, and so that is our Comply Shield tool. Again, really, it can help you or your provider assure that you have everything in place that you need to meet these requirements. Simple guidance, as I said, also not oversimplifying, giving you what we call those control guardrails to make sure that if you, for instance, are answering something compliant, that you have the proper backup to support that answer, which just assures that you are doing things right the first time around. As we know, this requirement is the NIST 800-171 is required today. For those of you who have not done one, I would encourage you to get those in place, and I would encourage you to talk to us about how we can help you with that. And as we know, this program is accelerating. You can expect that it's going to be in place, or at least ready to be implemented towards the end of this year. And if you want to participate on a go-forward basis, you're going to have to comply. So best to get ahead of the game now, or if you haven't started, you're a little bit behind. We can help you in the process of accelerating and helping you make sure that you have those components in place. So with that, we'll go ahead and conduct one more poll and open this up to questions. We are going to make an offer to those of you who are participating here today. If you are interested in trialing this Comply Shield tool for CMMC compliance at no cost, please indicate yes or no, or if you'd like to be contacted later. If you have indicated yes, folks from SureShield will be following up with you to get that trial set up. The cost ongoing is very nominal to you, and really, again, will be something you'll want to have in place ongoing if you are regularly participating you continue to be planning on participating in DoD contracts. It will not be something that can just be done and left on the shelf, and we can help you with that process as well. So I'm going to leave this open for a little bit while folks evaluate and come in. Again, for those who've indicated yes, we'll be following up with you to get that trial started. You should get a notification that comes out post this meeting that will allow you to actually schedule time on a calendar if you'd like to look at time that works for you. And the same will be the case for those who have indicated maybe later as well. But I see that we have some questions that have been answered. I have my colleague Chandi on with me, and maybe Chandi, as I haven't seen these, is there anything, I know the group, I believe, is open to seeing the questions that have been asked, but if you want to elaborate on any particular questions that you feel would be good to rediscuss.
Yeah, sure. So I think the question was for L1 compliance, self-assessment, and whether they need to be fully compliant with all the controls. So if I remember right, in the new regulation, you can't leave any one of the 17 controls on plan of action and milestone for future compliance. You need to
Correct.
comply with all, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And it is all self-attestation, and there's no third party involved for certifying that. And for L2, when is a third party certification required? And that also has to be specified by the contract and not otherwise. Is that correct?
I believe so, but keep in mind, everyone, I think that they're going to understand that given that they do have a little bit of a backlog in the certifying organizations, you will have to at least submit a timeline of when you plan to get that done, because they're not going to want this to be lingering for a long period of time, particularly if you're a level 2. The expectation is that you're going to have those in place, and that when your C3PAO comes in and validates that, you'll be good. But we can't assume that, given that until the rule comes out, it's likely there'll be some a little lag time. However, you're best to have all this in place, and again, you're required to have it in place right now through the DFARS and the NIST requirements. So at a minimum, you should already be getting that in place, and it was just going to make the process for you and your company that much easier here in the future to comply with. Open it up for any other questions. We still have a little bit of time left. We like to try to keep we've scheduled an hour, we like to try to keep them less than that for you, understanding the time that you have to this. But please, we will go for another couple of minutes to see if you have any additional questions. Again, the poll is still open for those of you that are still here. I appreciate if you can answer either way, yes, no, or perhaps later. I think we have almost everyone who's answered that at this time. And we will then, as I said, follow up with you to get this in place. We're committed as a company to help you make sure that you can participate successfully in this. Again, as I mentioned, if you are working with a outsourced MSP or an RPO, you have or should be asking them those questions. And if you want, you can put them in touch with us as well if they don't have some good tools in place, because we found the ones that we're working with can operate more efficiently and have helped very successfully assure that the clients that they're working with right now are currently in compliance and have established programs in place to assure that they are regularly in that. And again, it makes sense to have a mindset of a regular check-in. The more you have that, the less rework you will actually have to do, or the less potential peril you could put your company in if you don't have a means to go back and assure that you're still meeting all the requirements of those particular controls. So I don't see any more. Well, it looks like we have one more question that came over, Chandi. Cost of the software. So for our compliance solution, it's an annual charge. It's an annual subscription. It's less than $2,000 a year to meet that requirement, and that can be billed out on a monthly basis to you. If you are using our scanning tools, we basically look at the size of your organization, and there's a monthly charge for running those scans. If you're interested in learning more about that, please again contact us, and we're happy to provide that information. So the question I see is, do subcontractors also need to meet these requirements? The answer is yes. You will have to meet those requirements. If you are a subcontractor to a Department of Defense contract, the expectation is that you will also meet those requirements. And for those of you that may be working with primes now, there's a lot of you that have probably already had your primes coming to you asking for this information and where you stand, because the primes themselves are going to be on the hook with responsibility to make sure that their subcontractors have this in place. So if you can be assured that they are going to be very, very vigilant to make sure that you as a downstream supplier have the requirements in place as well, because they are potentially liable for that as well. So with that, we're at the quarter to the hour. I'll just wait one more, 5-10 seconds to see if anyone else has another question. And if not, we really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us today. This initiative is coming. We would love to help you if we can. And we wish you all the best of success in this endeavor, and thank you all for participating in our meeting. I do see another question that's come up. The question is, can you piggyback onto the prime contractor's systems? I am not sure exactly what you mean by that particular question. You may be in an environment with the prime contractor that helps assure that you are meeting those particular requirements. But anything that relates to you as a provider and your responsibilities, you will have to make sure that your organization meets those requirements. So you cannot basically say, because I'm working with this prime, I meet the requirements. You're going to need to have the same validation to back up whatever those responsibilities are that you as a prime, as a subcontractor need to make. And we're going to go ahead and, as I said, wrap up now. please, if you do have other questions that we haven't addressed or we're not able to address during this time, you will be getting follow-up emails with the presentation, with the content of this presentation, as well as this webinar, and also links as to how you can get in contact with us for more information or to schedule that trial or any other information that you may need or require. So we want to thank all you for participating here today. And with that, we will go ahead and close out the session. Sorry, I see one more question, if I can get it in quickly. I'm not sure I understand the question. Do you need more companies to work with as your subcontractor? If you don't mind, you can message me. I'm not sure I completely understand the question, and hopefully if you can reach out to us, we can answer that particular question for you. So with that, I want to thank you all for attending, and we will go ahead and end the session. Once again, thank you very much.